Hello and a very warm welcome to this special programme about the Thoughts of Chairmen Now. My name is David Roth from WPP, and this project, the Thoughts of Chairmen Now, has been a joint project with WPP and Grant Thornton. I'd like to introduce John Geldart, who is the Global Head of Marketing for Grant Thornton International. John, a very warm welcome.
Thanks so much indeed, David.
Well, this project, we're going to talk about how it came about and what it covers in a little while. But this project has been a joint collaboration between Grant Thornton and WPP. And in the next 60 minutes or so, we're going to cover quite a lot of ground. So let me give you a feel for what we're going to be talking about. Well, we're going to give you a background to the project. We're going to introduce you to the chairman of a number of Chinese companies that we have interviewed during the course of putting this project together. We're going to be sharing with you some thoughts and summary conclusions and insights of our discussions with the chairman, of our own knowledge, observation and judgment, and some specific research that we did to create some contextual insights for the analysis which was undertaken by Millward Brown in China, a WPP company. And then we'll be showing you how you can get hold of an abridged version of the book, The Thoughts of Chairmen Now, and an abridged digital version as well. Now, I think, John, it's fair to say that I don't think any other country in the world ever in the course of history has grown at the rate and also with the scale that China has done over the course of the last 20 years. I think therefore it's important to put in context where China sits today in the world. Now, we're going to show you a short video. It contains some of the numbers that puts the context towards and against where China sits in relation to its domestic economy, in relation to its sort of global stature now on the world stage as the world's second largest economy. Now, in true presenter style, I need to warn you, some people might find some of these facts disturbing, but that's the reality of where China is today. Let's take a look. So that's the context of where China is today. Let's now take a little step back, John, and just talk about this particular project, the Thoughts of Chairmen Now, and I suppose why WPP and Grant Thornton have collaborated to produce this. Where did it all start?
Well, if you remember, it started about a year ago, and as true great things, it started really. I can't remember if it was a bar or whether it was a coffee shop, but let's move over that and pass on. But say that it was really a collaboration because we have a joint passion about this amazing place, this amazing country, and we've been working there independently for quite some years. We both have a great interest in the place. And what we found really, I think, was in our deliberations and discussions together was that there are many, many books about China. There are hundreds of books about China. But few, if any, we felt really took a truly Chinese business perspective, if you like, standing in the shoes of the Chinese chairman and looking out at the world. And that was something that interested us, I think, and that was really where it started.
Yeah, I think this whole notion of hearing it from inside of the organisation, and I think when we started, we thought one of the biggest problems I think many people have in China is getting access to some of these very quality Chinese business leaders,
well, I think
and that's something that we tried to solve.
Yeah,
and I think we managed to do it.
I think we've been
quite
very lucky
successfully.
as well. And absolutely right. And I think that the success really, just to pick up that point, has come from two places really. One. Our organisation in China, Grant Thornton and WPP, has great relationships, Guangxi, with many companies across China, and we've been able to utilise that, have those people make those introductions. But the thing that I thought was tremendous was the real energy and enthusiasm of the chairman, who wanted to share their views of their perspective on the world. And I think maybe, in your experience, that might not have happened a few years ago either.
Yeah, I think. There is no doubt that China is rebalancing, and it's rebalancing from an economic position. But I think we're also seeing a rebalancing on the way in which Chinese business leaders want to engage to a wider community. That obviously we found that there's a great thirst for them to absorb as much knowledge and information as they can. But I think there's it sounds strange to say, but a greater inner confidence now within Chinese business leaders that actually they have a very interesting perspective that business leaders outside of China will find both useful and interesting. And I think it's the combination of those that I think is immensely compelling. Well. Just explain a little bit, John, about the process that we went through, because we met and we spoke and engaged with the chairman and many people from their organisation as well.
Yeah, across the whole of China. And not only did we get a good representative sample in terms of large and small, but also geographically. So we spent time, as you know, in Shanghai, in Beijing, we went to Wuhan, we went to Xiamen, we went to a number of different places, and that I think has given a richness and a texture to the book, and indeed looking at different industries. And I think it's fair to say they don't all speak with one voice, and that's part of the interest here. And as people read it and unpick it, I think they'll find that immensely interesting and indeed rewarding in the candidness and the candid nature of those people when they spoke to us. 14 altogether, and some very interesting content.
Well, probably now's a good time to introduce you to the chairman who feature in the Thoughts of Chairmen Now. Well, I know that we said that not all the chairmen speak in one voice, but there were some key themes that emerged from our discussions with the chairman. So I think maybe it's a good time just to take some of those headline themes. Obviously, we can't cover everything that we have in the book, but I think this will give a flavour of some of the key themes. Let's start with the first one, which is sort of slightly surprising, counterintuitive in a sense. You know, China's been, as we've said, been growing at this exponential rate, double-digit GDP growth for so many years. Now it's scheduled to be about 7.5%. I've got to say, I would take 7.5% growth, but that's significantly less than it has been. You would have imagined that the chairman that we spoke to would be up in arms about this rebalancing of the Chinese economy, but that wasn't the case at all, really, was it?
Not at all, and in fact, I don't think they necessarily believe it's going to be 7.5%. I think they were even happier, interestingly, if it was a lower percentage. So slowdown is actually good, and we heard this, and it is counterintuitive, but we heard this from a number of different chairmen. And I think in particular, the chairman of ITG, who is in Xiamen, the port on the southeast of China, used to be old Amoy in the old days, and is the gateway, and has been the gateway to China for so many businesses, since the 1700s, in fact. And he said something that was very interesting. He said, you know, it's time to slow down. And we pressed him on this, and he said, well, actually, it's not about necessarily slowing down in the way we do things. It's about taking a breather, making sure we rebalance, that we think about our business in a much more focused way, and actually having slower GDP growth will, and I think you have a phrase about this which you can talk about, I think, as the sea goes out?
I think it's Warren Buffett's phrase, in a sense, yeah. You know, when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming without any clothes on. And I think, in a sense, that's what a number of the chairmen were saying, both directly and indirectly, which is, you know, in an economy that's growing at 20% per year, you know, you don't have to be that good to be able to succeed. And I think a lot of the chairmen are saying that actually they've got the confidence to believe that their business is good, and the confidence to believe that their businesses can grow even in a rebalanced economy, and actually it's good for competition.
Yeah, and I think that if we go into this next point, I suppose, is around that it used to be that China was known for copying. I mean, all issues around IP and counterfeiting that I think I hope are going away to a degree. But interesting phrase, copying to kind of blending.
Yeah, I think to me a great example of that was one of the chairmen that we talked about. It was an industrial company. They produce chemicals, probably for all the leading sort of chemicals and manufacturers around the world. And he was saying one of the key things that was driving their organisation was trying to mix the best of the way in which the Chinese do things, the way in which the Chinese are managed, together with the best of what was going on in the West. And it is this sort of blending, and a couple of examples of that. The first was just the way in which the company was structured. So when he took over, and he's a professional manager, and has gained quite a lot of his experience by managing joint ventures between Chinese industrial companies and big Western industrial conglomerates. And he's inherited or taken over this company from a management perspective, and is focusing it on doing fewer things but doing them better than I suppose what was very much the Chinese way of trying to do absolutely everything. And the second area is this whole notion of the way in which the company was structured. Much more now a matrix management sort of perspective. Each chief executive of the divisions that he's established also has a matrix responsibility for a key function that cuts right across all of the businesses. And I think finally, he's taken that, in a sense, that philosophy right up to the top of the organisation, because at the main board level, he has also introduced a number of Western non-executive directors to create that sort of balance.
I think also this mix of, in that instance, Western and Chinese. There's a bit of a mix going on in China with change as well. This notion of maybe grey is good. And I was very taken by a comment from Alice Fanyang, who is the very senior executive at New China Asset Management. And she said, you've got to remember there that it's an old Chinese saying, which is that you can't have fish in clear water. And her reference really, I think, was about the ambiguity that exists. It just has to be accepted. And you can't apply the rules of the West to China. But this ambiguity and this greyness that sometimes exists sometimes frustrates Westerners when working in China. It's going to live with it. You have to come to terms with it. You have to accept it. It's also something about, whilst there is ambiguity and greyness that you have to accept, there is immense agility, because in order to get to where they want to go through, they have to manage through the ambiguity, manage the grey, and make quick decisions. And I thought that was a very interesting blend and mix of the whole thing, and we found it in many places.
So let's talk a little bit about mobility, because I think mobility has three sort of roots to it. And a good example was a property company we talked to, Fuxing, and they've looked at mobility in three ways in China. The first is the mobility of employees and individuals. I mean, the chief executive was the youngest finance director of a Chinese listed company. He was instrumental in changing the way in which the management structure works, so there's mobility in that. There's the mobility in taking a bet on where Chinese middle classes are moving to in terms of going more west and developing property there. And also sort of the general sort of mobility in terms of looking at the way in which organisations are structured and giving opportunities for employees, which sort of comes really to this next point of this whole notion of how businesses see themselves and people that they work with, and the head and the heart, not just the cool clinical look at it from a numbers perspective, but mixing the head with the heart is something that crosses across a lot of the chairmen. Yeah,
absolutely, and in particular one chairman I guess epitomises this, and that is the chairman of Safewell. And you read about him in the book, but the real thing and about the company in the book, but the interesting thing for him, I suppose, is about how he works with his people and how he works with the notion of da'ai, big love in Chinese. And he's a Buddhist, and he runs most of his business in a blended way between applying reason and an instinct. And the instinct is from his heart, and it was a really strong point he made. And it came through in every one of the chairmen. They all talk with a great deal of emotion and passion about their people, about their business, and indeed, we'll talk about this later, about their brands, David.
Well, brands are all about the emotional sort of perspective, or that sort of mix of the rational and the emotional perspective. But one of the aspects that we've looked at is this whole notion of the move from this mass population of 1.6 billion, that's probably not the unofficial number, 1.3 is probably more official, but the 1.6 billion consumers in China, and the whole notion of the individual mattering more now than the collective sort of matters. And I think one of the chairmen that exemplifies that more than any others is David Sun, who's the chief executive of Home Inn, who has put it's a people business, it's a hotel business, and it's put people and people's expressing their individuality in the workplace as being a central theme of the way in which he believes and the business has grown and absolutely develops. So let's look at the other notion, this whole notion of sort of more lateral and sort of a less linear approach to the way in which business and business leadership is taking place now.
Yeah, and I think just to pick up on that, the guy who perhaps exemplifies that the best is the chairman of Refund. It's a business that is both grounded in China, clearly, but has a lot of joint ventures with many organisations across the West, electronics business, and he has set a notion, I suppose, we've articulated as looking laterally as an employee at the business, not in a linear way. And this really comes out of the education system in China. Really, the education system in China has been one of rote learning. And his desire, and the desire of many of the chairmen we spoke to, David, as you know, was that we'd like to have a broader education base. We'd like to have a broader understanding. We don't just want people who are going to learn by rote.
And I think it's interesting that we are seeing sort of business now pushing policy to try and ensure that businesses are getting their qualified people in the right way that they need to develop their own individual businesses.
Sounds a bit Western, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Not necessarily a bad thing, I suppose, that business, in a sense, is having more of an influence in the way in which policy is being pursued.
I think maybe one of the things that we found was around a bit of a change. I know something very close to your heart, David, about digital China, that change of the digital age in China.
Yes, I mean, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that China is the most digitally connected society in the world, and that digitally connectiveness is increasing at an absolutely rapid rate. And I think Spring Airlines is a phenomenal example, because it's really at both those poles. It's the chairman of Spring is probably the oldest chairman we've talked to, around sort of 70 plus, and yet he's absolutely embraced the digital sort of arena, because he knows that it's a very important way of communicating with his target audience, which tends to be a younger target audience. He, as an example, has for his brand more than 1 million followers on Weibo, sort of a cross between Facebook and Twitter, I suppose, and he's using that information, the profiles that he's got of his customers and people who like his brand, so that when they go on the airline, he's physically using that data to put like-minded people sitting next to each other in the aircraft. I think it's just a wonderful way of mixing, in a sense, the thought leadership and the experience of the old together with the technology of the new. And I think lastly, we've seen something that is good from our perspective, from the WPP perspective, the whole notion of brands, and I think a very different feel to what we would have experienced had we interviewed these chairmen even maybe 5 years ago. Whereas today, the brand is seen as unbelievably important by the chairman and the CEOs. It's on the chairman and the CEO's agenda. And in fact, a number of the chairmen we spoke to in each of their board meetings.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a little bit scary in a way, because maybe in the West, often brand is further down the agenda. It might even be on the agenda, but further down the list on the topics. It's absolutely front and centre, and in fact, in all of the chairmen we spoke to, to such a degree that it not only is on the agenda, but in many ways, they are driving it in a way that perhaps you don't see in the West. And I think it's a great challenge from a WPP perspective, also a challenge from the intangible asset aspect that it is from our perspective, but really interesting to see, and actually something that we can learn from, and something we need to think about.
And they're not doing that for their own self-indulgence, in a sense. I think the key thing for me is that the CEOs understand that the brand is important not only for their balance sheet, but also important as an internal and external sort of umbrella for the organisation, and especially with the new upwardly mobile middle-class Chinese who are making many, many more purchase decisions, not just based on rational, but also based on a whole series of brand dimensions, of which in their arena they now need to place a little bit more heavily on. Well, they're just some of the themes. There are a lot more in the book, and we'll give you ways of accessing the abridged digital version and the complete book a little bit later on. Well, I'm now joined by Elspeth Chung, who is a director of Millward Brown Optimoor. Millward Brown Optimoor have been commissioned by WPP for a number of years to create a brand ranking of the most valuable global brands, and also for the last 4 years, the top 50 most valuable Chinese brands, and Elspeth is responsible for those ranking numbers. And I managed to twist Elspeth's arm to give us a little bit of insight as to what the numbers may well say for the 2014 valuations, which will be announced in Beijing on the 4th of December. Because I think it's interesting to put that in the context of some of the global issues that some of our chairmen have been talking about. First of all, Elspeth, let's just look at that sort of macroeconomic perspective and the rebalancing of the economy and a growth rate of about 7.5%. How does that relate to the growth rates that you're beginning to see from the numbers of the valuations of the most valuable Chinese brands at the moment?
All right. Beijing has set a GDP growth rate of 7.5% for 2013. This is already a very impressive rate in the rest of the world. But if this rate is in China, it's already the lowest rate in the past 20 years. The new leadership, they are very aware of this lowest rate, and they are very willing to accept it, because they know that in order to shift the economy from one that's driven by credit, investment, and export to one that's driven by consumer demand, they have to pay a price, and they're very much happy to accept this rate.
So how does that 7.5% forecasted GDP rate growth square up with the changes year on year that we're seeing in terms of the valuations of China's most valuable brands?
Right, this year is our first year to do top 100 most valuable Chinese brands. Before, we just did top 50. And if we take a look at the brands which appear in both years, we see a positive growth rate of 8%, which is more or less in line with the GDP growth in China.
Okay, so moving on, I suppose, to the other dimension of the rebalancing, and that's, in a sense, the rebalancing of the economy, not so much focused on being the production engine of the world, but actually being focused on domestic consumption. Is there anything that we can see in terms of that strategy as it plays out in the growth rates of the most valuable brands, or the brands that will be in the new top 100 ranking for China?
Yeah, if we have a look at the top 100 brands, actually most of them are still coming out from the state-owned enterprise categories. But if we take another look at the result, actually most of the top rises in 2014 are consumer-related brands. For example, healthcare, technology, and food and dairy. So these categories. And for the newcomers in the top 100 brands, they are mostly from the consumer-driven brands as well. For example, footwear, education, and jewelry retailers. And we have also seen some very interesting brand building initiatives taken up by the leading brands in China. And in less than 2 months' time, we will have a closer look again.
Great. Well, it's interesting, I suppose, to see this government policy, in a sense, trickling down as it impacts businesses in China, and clearly the valuations of domestic Chinese brands. Well, we look forward to learning more about the Brandsy Top 100 Most Valuable Chinese Brands when that is launched in December. But for the moment,
Right.
Elsbeth, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, David.
Ed Nussbaum is our global CEO, the global CEO of Grant Thornton International. And we now have a short video from Ed talking about the Thoughts of Chairmen Now and doing business in China, both from an international perspective and indeed from his experience personally. Ed.
I'm Ed Nussbaum, Global CEO of Grant Thornton International. I've been with Grant Thornton for 35 years. China is an important place for companies of all sizes to do business in. And I've worked with companies, particularly in the U.S., when I was running our U.S. firm, that have expanded their operations, manufacturing, and services into China in a wide variety of industries. I've had a great experience working with companies all over the world as they've expanded their operations into China. When I was running the U.S. firm, we worked with companies that made everything from hair dryers to shoes, as they moved their manufacturing into China. China provided a low-cost opportunity. It, of course, had some challenges, but we overcame those challenges and were able to produce high-quality products at a very low price. The attitudes towards doing business in China have evolved over the years. If you look at it 15, 20 years ago, every company around the world wanted to move their manufacturing operations to China to take advantage of the low-cost labor pool. So we saw companies from the United States and Europe move manufacturing to China, so that they could produce the products there to export them back to the US or Europe. But now everyone's looking at it from a different perspective. There's a growing, intelligent middle class in China that's looking for high-quality consumer goods. So every company wants to manufacture in China to produce products to be used and sold in China, as well as import products into China. China is also a source of growing research and development, IT developments, and high-quality labor, improved productivity, opportunities to provide for every company around the world. I would suggest that any company, any person that's looking to do business in China has to start by doing their homework. China is a unique culture, and I can tell you from my many trips to China and my experiences doing business there that you have to start by understanding the culture and understanding what it takes to get things done. Companies in China have an amazing ability to produce outcomes, but you have to work with them and understand where they're coming from and how they're thinking to achieve your goals. This book provides great insight into doing business in China. It talks about what the branding in China is all about. Brand China is a key development going forward. It gives you the history of business in China, going back 5,000 years, and particularly focusing on the recent past and how China is evolving as a business community. And finally, it provides real-life stories with business leaders. These leaders provide insight on what it takes to do business with them and with all leaders throughout China.
Our chairman of our Chinese firm, of Grant Thornton and WPP, is Xu Hua. Xu Hua now speaks to us a little bit about his experience as a Chinese owner of a business, Chinese chairman, about the book, the insights, and lessons really for Westerners looking at China and thinking about how they might move forward in that amazing and huge country. Xu Hua.
大家好，我是志同中国的首席合伙人徐华。志同中国一共有2700多名员工，在全国有17个办公室。我很荣幸能与大家一起来分享我对这本书的看法。与其他国家相比，中国是一个与众不同的国家。每个国家都有自己的历史和开展业务的方式，但是对于那些有胆识，并且勇于投入时间和精力的人来说，在中国开展业务会带来巨大的利益。当然，与其他国家相比，中国也有特殊的挑战和诸多需要考虑的因素。中国的独特性来源于5000年的历史和文化。这意味着与其他国家相比，对待中国看待事物是有着不同的视角。中国正在调整经济结构，过去30年来取得了前所未有的增长。新一届政府和领导人正在加快改革的步伐，吸引更多的外来投资。对于那些想要在中国开展业务，或者想要与中国企业合作的人来说，这些变化带来了巨大的机遇，但同时他们需要了解更多的中国方式。我相信这本书将帮助中国人以及海外人士洞察中国企业以及中国企业的领导层是如何思考未来的。同时，这本书也帮助海外人士在中国开展业务时，需要考虑哪些可以做，哪些不可以做。我希望这将刺激更多的商务人士到中国来，加深他们对如何在中国开展业务的了解。当然，我们非常欢迎他们，我们会在他们来的时候给他们提供更多的帮助。有很多建议，但主要有以下3点。首先，请阅读这本书。这本书给出了很多很好的建议，书中也给出了很多精彩的指导。其次， 请花时间揣摩中国的方式，并且尽可能多地了解中国的历史和中国史的思维。相信这与你们的方式有巨大的差别。你需要花时间建立关系，还需要耐心。中国已有5000年的历史，我们已经习惯放慢脚步。花时间多与人接触，你将会更深刻地了解中国。最后，当你来中国时，你最好找一位了解中国和中西文化差异的专业人士。你必须亲身体会中国，这样你的业务才能够在中国顺利开展。当你在中国的时候，我建议你多倾听别人的经历和经验。如果你想了解如何在中国建立品牌，你应该咨询当地的 WPP 代理。如果你想了解如何在中国开展业务，你应该联系志同中国在当地的合伙人。首先，我非常感谢你们2位合作出版这本书。你们在中国生活多年，对于中国方式有深刻的了解。然而，更重要的是，这本书记录了中国企业有代表性的真实想法和文字。这本书的精彩之处在于它捕捉到了中国企业领袖是如何看待他们的企业。市面有很多类似的书籍，但是很少有真实触及中国企业领袖是如何思考以及他们的感受。阅读这本书虽然不能使你成为一个中国通，但却是一个好的开端。它会鼓励更多的人着手在中国开展业务。非常高兴您能花时间与我共同分享我的看法，谢谢。
Well, both WPP and Grant Thornton have got particular expertise in helping Chinese businesses either grow their business or grow their brands domestically in China, and also more and more these days, as our chairman spoke to us about, looking at how to grow their companies and grow their brands outside of China. And it's only some 12 months since the Olympics, the 2012 London Games, were taking place pretty much outside the building that we are broadcasting from. And we took that opportunity to understand how Chinese brands were viewed outside of China at a time when quite a lot of effort was being put in by Chinese brands to align themselves with the Olympic Games, both sponsorships of Chinese teams and of international teams as well. So let's take a look at the status and the opportunities and the issues that Chinese brands are likely to face when they go international. It's not just the battle for medals that's taking place here in London 2012, with billions of people right across the globe watching their country go for gold. There's a parallel competition going on, the one for brands and marketeers, and that competition is every bit as competitive. It's 4 years since Li Ning audaciously lit the Beijing Olympics alight, and where brand China was exposed to the world. Chinese brands are using this canvas of London and the most watched event in the planet in the competition for growing their strong domestic brands into strong international brands and even global brands. And it's not just Chinese athletes that Chinese brands are sponsoring. If you thought you'd seen a rather unusual logo on the kit of the American diving team, well, you'd be right. That's Li Ning. And if the company's ambitions are anything to go by, that logo won't be unfamiliar for much longer. So we took to the streets of London to find out just how aware consumers from around the world are of Chinese brands. And we started at the most famous retail street of them all, London's Oxford Street. Well, take a look at the brand logos that are on this board.
Yeah.
And tell me, are there any logos here that you recognise?
Yeah, the 361 degrees.
And what's 361?
I think it's a sports brand.
No, I don't.
At the moment, no.
No, I don't think I recognize any of them.
No.
No.
It's a beer, right?
Lenovo?
I know Lenovo. Lenovo is computer people.
That is a big fat no from me.
No, none at all.
Would you be surprised to know that these are the 50 most important and valuable brands in China?
Probably not, no. I wouldn't be surprised. There's a lot of Chinese companies that we haven't heard of and aren't aware of, and yet are huge, that aren't really, brand names over here.
But unlike the ease within which certain Chinese athletes appeared to win gold in London 2012, creating and developing international Chinese brands is going to be considerably more challenging across a whole series of dimensions. Well, we've already spoken about how important digital China is, and in fact all of our chairmen recognise the importance of China digital to their business, their brand and their growth prospects. Well, one of China's leading brands and leading internet brands, Tencent, used also the Olympic Games as a tremendous vehicle to bind their consumers closer and tighter to the brand, and also to align what was going on in London with their huge audience in China. Well, we're here in Romford, Essex. It's 1 a.m. in the morning, and the building that I'm standing in front of, up until a few weeks ago, used to be a disused youth club. Well, it's been radically transformed and is now the headquarters of one of China's leading brands and internet companies. This is the London 2012 headquarters and broadcasting studio of Tencent. So let's take a look inside and see how Tencent is using this building to help build the Tencent brand. As in about half an hour, the studio will start live broadcasting as millions of Chinese wake up to hear the latest news of what happened at London 2012. So we're in the studio. This is the main part where all the action takes place, and the studio is divided into two halves. The first half over here is where the Olympic gold athletes will come and be interviewed, and over the course of the Olympic period there have been almost 40 different gold medal winners who've taken part in live programming here. And the team over here are in the middle of putting together tonight's live programme, which will go out at about 1:30 UK time, early morning in China. The second part of the studio is towards the back, and this is called the tea house. And the tea house is where the families of Olympic medal winners will come to be interviewed and will share some very emotional moments with their children. So I'm now walking into the control room of what is the nerve centre of the Tencent production here in the Romford studio. And as you can see around me, it's full of technical gear which enables the entire crew to feed the live broadcast from the studio directly out to the internet, so that the more than 400 million Chinese viewers can watch this programming live. And so from this temporary studio here in Essex, Tencent are doing something that fits the brand really well. They're the interconnecting social networking glue that's communicating what's happening here in London to millions of people in China, and they're also doing something that the Chinese consumer is expecting from Tencent: constant innovation, in a way that also allows the Chinese consumers to get a sense of what these amazing athletes have achieved here in London and the interconnection with them and their families. Creating all of this takes vision and money, and plenty of it. This doesn't come cheap, but it's a reflection of how important social networking, the internet, is now to the fabric of Chinese society. Tencent's innovation and the way in which they're using their brand to establish a deeper bond with the consumers is being highlighted and magnified by the program they put on here for the 2012 Games. We should expect more of this type of innovation from Tencent in the future, and I, for one, can't wait to see what they'll be doing for Rio.
Well, David, really interesting video about Tencent, and some insights there for, I think, all of us to take to heart as Chinese brands come to the West. Challenges for them, but nevertheless real opportunities. Final video today is from David's son. David is the CEO of Home Inns, and you mentioned David earlier, and his focus on people. Let's hear from David about his perspective around management and the difference between managing from a Chinese perspective and managing from a Western perspective. David's son.
Thank you. My name is David Sun. My current position is CEO of Home Inns Hotel and Inns companies. Based in China, now we have 2,000 hotels across to China to operate.
David, you've been really successful in building the Home Inns brand. What has been the main focus of your attention on building that brand?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of the big points. First is really it's a good business model, very suitable for the local Chinese market. Second is the team, especially on the entrepreneur team. They do have a spirit to do something. Finally, I think still is the people. Now, 70,000 of the Home Inns people today, they are doing their right job day by day to make this successful, to service the local customer, to make them satisfied. So I think all this is the key of success of Home Inns. I am a professional manager, so my job is to involving as in a team, as a member of the team, to get everybody together, try to direction them, try to motivate them, try to working together with them to make this success.
Thank you very much. That's a real insight, David. My next question is about the difference maybe between how you manage in a Chinese company and maybe from your experience of how that is different from a more Western style of management. Do you maybe have any observations about the differences?
Yeah, yeah. I think before I working for Home Inn, I working for two companies in China. One is B&Q Kingfisher Group. The other one is CP Group in Thailand base. So that is one is the Western company. The other one is we call Eastern company. One is the public company. The other one is family company. So the difference is in the private company, family company, Eastern company, we are more working for work. We spend a lot of time, try hard, working hard for the result. Sometimes it's on a very detailed base. When I changed my company from the Lotus going to the B&Q, I still can remember. I report to my president. the first week, I fill in the schedule, my working schedule for the first week to give to my president. My president is smile and say, David, Saturday, Sunday is your life day. Why you fill all the schedule on Friday, Saturday and Sunday? How you can balancing the work? How you can make effective for the work? So this is the first word. Sometimes it's the first word I listen, the different words I listen to. So second difference is for the Western company is more focusing on the authority, policy, procedure, strategy, planning. We call very scientific scheduling management style. But in the private company, in the traditional Chinese company, it's more like to using their brand. They make a lot of decisions very, very quickly, but very, very suddenly. They have a schedule sometimes, they have a policy, but they're easy to changing a lot of things.
My next question is about brand. You are building a brand in China, and I'm interested in your perspective of whether that brand will maybe expand outside China.
I think brand is very important for the consumer business, especially on the hospitality business. So today we are still young, but to be honest now, Hongmin is quite strong in what we call local domestic market as a branding. I believe brand is not just a logo. Brand is the delivery of the commitment. I think expansion of the brand is the talking of expansion of the brand is easy, but for the company like Hongmin's, if our customer today we have about 18 million we call loyalty member to experience our brands, Hongmin's brand, yearly base. So if our customer starting to go outbound of the travel, Europe, Southeast Asia, US, that's I think is the value for our brand to go traveling with our customer to bring the more value for the customer to go every way of the country of the out of China.
David, doing business in China, everybody says it's very different from doing business in the West. What advice would you give to people who want to invest, who want to do business in China, but maybe are not from China?
Sure. Yeah, I think first of all, China is a big market, but also China is a small market. So if you look at the whole China, that's a really very big market, population, and also market. But if you look at every region, they are very different.
David Sun, Hongmin's, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Well, we've pretty much come to the end of this broadcast, John. Thank you very much indeed. All that's left to say is how you can get more additional information. If you go to www.thethoughtsofchairmennow.com, that will enable you to click to download an abridged digital version of the book as a PDF. You can also click to watch that online as an interactive flipbook. And you can also go to the Apple Store to download for your iPad the special interactive iPad abridged version. You can do that via the website, or you can go directly to the Apple site and just search for Chairman Now, and that should take you directly to the app. Well, that's it. Thank you very much indeed for watching. You can also get hold of the full copy of that book through the website as well. Well, from us, from everybody here at WPP and from our partners at Grant Thornton, thank you very much indeed for watching.
Thank you.